As you know, today is the last lecture of the Alumni Careers Conversation series. Today we have Leon Cooper here to talk to you all. Leon is an alumnus from the science department. During his undergraduate studies, he studied physics, psychology, chemistry, and mathematics. Leon was also a science student ambassador and has attended various conferences in Melbourne and Sydney. As well as that, he is also responsible for co-founding Mass Cubed, a club for science advanced and science scholars students. So without any further ado, I'll hand it off to Leon. And
Thank you. Sound check. Everyone can hear me all right? Good. So look, just to preface this talk, I'm not here on behalf of my company. I'm here for Monash as an alumnus. I really want you to get out of this some kind of good understanding of what the management consulting industry is, what it's like to work in business with science skills, and essentially form an opinion of whether you'd like to do it or not. I'm not saying that you should be doing it because I've chosen it. It was good for me. I really want you to just get out of it an understanding of whether you'd actually like to do it or not. So that's what I'm hoping to cover. Quite broadly, what I'd like to do is take you through what the consulting industry is, why it exists, and why people do it. I'd also like to give you a bit of my experience, how I got into the field, what I've done, and why I'm still in it. Essentially, after that, I'd like to put it back and make it relevant for you. So what skills that you're learning now, how do you apply them? Where can you hope to go with them? What's the best way to start in a business career if you choose to do that? And then I'd like to have some Q&A time, so obviously welcome to write down questions and we can cover them all at the end. I've also, as Carmen was saying, I have a handout for those online. There should be a downloadable copy. So yeah, essentially management consulting arose as a professional services industry in response to companies that were starting to become more specialised in what they actually delivered to their customers, what they built, what services they delivered. And it became more cost effective in advanced economies for these companies to actually employ a professional services firm who was quite good at, one or two or a range of things instead of actually doing it within their own business. So the whole purpose of consulting is for us as a company to come in and work directly with a client, provide a specific service for them as skilled practitioners of a certain activity. And then essentially they pay us for a fixed outcome for a fixed time frame, and then we'd go to another client and then another client and so forth. So the consulting industry itself is almost like coaching for businesses. So we would go in as almost a business coach, help them run their business as they'd like to run it, but once we've finished, they pay us, we leave, we go on to the next project. So in a sense, it's almost like the university lifestyle when you're doing a whole range of subjects. You're focused on one for a short period of time, you have an assignment, you deliver that assignment, and then you're done and you move on to the next subject or the next assignment or something like that. So it's quite similar to what you're doing now at university. In terms of the firms that exist in the consulting industry, there's a lot of global firms. And like most businesses, there's about 3 different sizes of firms that you can get. The main ones are the big multinationals, which have a whole range of services. They have consultants who are based in a lot of different cities around the world. So working for these companies, you can be expected to travel quite a lot. You'd learn a whole range of skills and essentially be on engagements or projects for months at a time probably. In the middle of the range, there's consulting firms which specialise in maybe 2 to 5 different areas. So specifically, say, mergers and acquisitions of companies or specific financial skills. And the people that usually go to those firms are people who are specifically skilled in a particular area, and they want to only really just do that kind of advisory. So they'd be working with different clients, but only really focused on doing that one thing here, there, and in other places. And the smallest firms are the ones that are more like think tanks, where you have small groups of people, highly specialised, and clients usually hire those kind of firms for very specific outcomes. And it's usually they want to know a very deep subject matter topic or some kind of solution that they can use, and it's usually a very short time frame for those kind of engagements, but then also quite highly paid. So that's sort of the range of companies that exist if you were looking at consulting. Also, there's also a spectrum of the kind of activities you do in consulting. On one side, there's more of a a generalized facilitative approach to helping clients actually solve their own problem. So almost back to that coaching aspect, working with a client and helping them work through a problem. And I can link that back to how we learn things in science and apply them in science in a bit later. Essentially, that's more of a guiding the client, working with the client to reach their own outcomes. On the other side of the spectrum, there's more of a prescriptive approach where you have a very specific knowledge of a certain thing, so in finance or other areas of business, marketing for example, and you go in and pretty much say, this is the solution, we'll help you implement it, but essentially we'll tell you what to do and you listen. So that's sort of at the other end of the spectrum. And if anyone's watched that show House of Lies, they'll probably be able to relate to that. That's sort of a view of the cutthroat world in consulting in the US. So essentially that's an overview of what the industry is. Essentially consultants helping clients solve problems for a fixed fee, for a fixed time frame, a lot of variety and experience and all that sort of thing. So essentially how I got into consulting, I was doing, earlier on, I was doing physics, psychology and mathematics in Monash. And I was also involved in Golden Key and some other societies like that. And I joined a firm that was pretty much sending out letters to scientists and engineers saying, we're looking for your kind of skills, come and see if you'd like to work with us. And I essentially just took them up on that offer and haven't really looked back. So when I joined in the graduate program, and in consulting there's usually a certain consistent tiering that most of the big firms use. You usually start in as an analyst and working a lot with data and pretty much doing a lot of note taking and organising the engagement from the ground. So you're managing all of the interactions with the clients and making sure that everything happens like clockwork, just to get a feel for how the industry works. Usually the next level from that is a consultant level where you've learned how to actually do a lot of the business type stuff, the basics, and then you start to be able to form solutions for clients to actually work and help them solve their problem instead of just, being the person who's doing all the organising essentially. But it's worth starting in the graduate programs in these firms just so, you get an idea of how the actual business operates. And then you get to manager levels and senior manager levels where you start actually just managing the relationship with clients and actually helping them understand what their own challenges are. So then you can lead an engagement with consultants and analysts who actually go in there and deliver the outcomes. So when I joined in 2009 and have been travelling quite a lot, so I travel probably at least half the year outside of Melbourne, usually Sydney, Canberra, been overseas a few times to work on very short projects over there. And I essentially just working through multiple clients and projects, worked up to management level. So I'm a manager now and working with teams. So I essentially have my own team on different projects that I go in there and work with the senior client stakeholders and then essentially work out with them what they want to happen. And then working back with the team of people who is pretty much working for me at that particular project and helping them understand specific responsibilities for that specific challenge. So every project is almost different in that respect. And I think I'll stay with this kind of work. I mean, for me, when I was at Monash, I was always thinking, how do I actually apply my scientific skills and my interest in psychology, interest in mathematics and complex systems and all of these things, how can I actually apply these all in one place? And I've just found that working in this kind of industry where you do have a lot of ex-scientists, ex-engineers, working and solving these really hard problems, it's really, I don't know, I found it very fulfilling in terms of just the people that I've met and the people that I work with and the people that I keep on meeting through this business, because they've all they've done a very specialised thing from time to time. They've done research, for example, and then they've come to really apply it to do really relevant type of problems. So that's sort of why I'm still doing it, to make sure that everything I learned in science is actually being used to solve a real problem instead of just an exercise. So that's sort of my experience, I guess. And when I reflect on what scientific skills can actually be applied in business, there's a huge range. I mean, hypothesis testing in its essence, the scientific method, is so valuable for businesses to help them just understand how to get from a problem to a solution, that most scientists, thinking that everyone knows this kind of stuff, essentially can walk into this environment and just be able to make sense out of seeming chaos. And you have people who are schooled in business who know what the rules are, but they don't seem to know how to put the pieces together and solve a problem. So I think scientific skills, especially in analysis, being able to look at numbers, for example, whether they're financial figures or whether they're measurements or any of these sort of things, it's the actual skills that I've found when you've done all your assignments in university, that when you apply them to a business situation or some kind of challenge that any organisation's having, you start to be able to see things that other people don't see. So especially mathematics, especially things like psychology, when you're working with organisations and they're sort of they're playing by the rules, they're doing what they think business people should do, but as a scientist you can almost see through some of that and understand how the organisation's working as a system and how different things are affecting other things and how you can measure them and how you can actually bring real value to people who are just sort of looking at a big problem and can't seem to break it down into its parts and find a solution. Definitely statistics and things like that. On my first project I remember walking into this, it was an energy company, and they were looking at all of these different transactions that were happening, and they had these huge spreadsheets of these things, and I was able to just go in, run statistical analysis over it. I did it actually in MATLAB, which was a bit of a no-no, but what happened at the time, I made this report, and it was this statistical control system essentially, and they'd never seen it before. I mean, they were expecting some kind of bar graph or something like that. And as a scientist, I was able to walk in and just pretty much say, here's the analysis behind it, and here's a trend going this way, and this is what you should be doing in terms of making a decision. And if I hadn't done the science stuff, there's no way I would have been able to do that. I would have just walked in and done the sort of standard thing that they would have expected without having much insight into why it was happening or what they should do about it. So as a scientist, it was sort of like, that's the kind of way that I still apply my skills in business. I sort of let the whole business speak sort of go past and focus on what the real problems are, which I think a lot of people who come out of business degrees struggle with that. They seem to think that the terminology is the most important thing and the concepts that they've learned are the only things that they'll ever need to know. But when you're coming in it from a scientific point of view, it doesn't really matter what the labels are, it's the same sort of thing. It's still modelling, it's still mathematics, and it's still relationships and psychology and all of these things. And without the labels, you can see it as a scientist, and I think it brings great strength to how scientists actually operate in business. I also know a lot of people who are ex-scientists working in business, and they're very successful at it too. A lot of people who did PhDs and are now working in management, especially in IT, to pretty much just look at things in a systemic fashion and be able to advise managers on what they should be doing in terms of their whole enterprise systems instead of just being technical wizards. Being able to connect all of these things and also relating it back to organisational aspects as well. So there's a lot of scope for being a scientist and being very successful in business as well. Not sure what else to cover, I guess. I mean, I'd like to open it up to questions. I know it might be a bit early, but let's do that. And if I think of anything worth rabbiting on about, I'll do that. So any questions? Hi.
Thank you for starting off with. So you have a science background. You didn't have any business background. You hadn't taken any courses at Monash in business or anything like that. Did you find, so you mentioned that you found that almost an advantage because you could see through all the craft that business people have created and get you part of the problem. But did you find that it was a disadvantage? Did you find that you were walking into situations where people were saying all these business terms and you just didn't have any idea what was going on?
Yes and no. I mean, when I finished my degree and chose to work there, so I had 4 or 5 months lead time because I knew I was actually going to go there. I went to the library and just got a whole stack of business books. So I did almost a self-taught course on business before I started. And it's sort of that sort of brings up a bigger question in consulting. The people who succeed versus those who don't are usually ones who take responsibility for their own learning. So I could have, obviously not gone to the library, read all those books, and just walked in and said, I'm green, you know, don't expect anything of me. But as you go through a career in business as well, the people who succeed excessively are the ones who are always teaching themselves what's relevant. So yes, learning about business and learning about acronyms and all of that sort of thing was useful at the time to get a foothold. But now even learning specific industry challenges or trends happening in industry, you know, further on down the track, I'm still trying to make sure that I'm educated in some area that's actually useful beyond applying science skills. So it's almost up to you. I mean, you jump on Wikipedia and you can learn a whole lot about a whole lot of stuff pretty quickly, and you know, it's pretty much just building on your own learning and never stopping learning. Ultimately, I think.
Did they expect you to take any short courses when they discovered that you didn't have a business background or anything?
I'd say that probably 2/3 of people working in my company don't really have a formal business education background. The training is really good. So when I joined, within a few months, I was in Chicago doing a 2-week training course. So they have classroom training in my company, and it's a curriculum-based training. So you actually do units in, say, financial analysis or structured messaging or making documents. So they actively teach people who come in with a skill set, knowing that skill set's valuable, but hiring for the attitude and the methodology, not so much the knowledge. So it was almost an advantage. I'd say it was an advantage just because I didn't have all of the stuff that was pre-wired from a university degree.
So that's interesting. I would have expected that you were an unusual case for your company, but you're saying that a lot of people were coming in with similar sort of backgrounds.
Yeah, well maybe not physics. A lot of engineers, a lot of chemists, psychologists, definitely. And a lot of people who've just come in and they're looking for something else. I mean, consulting isn't really a very well-established industry in some parts, so a lot of people don't even know about it. And I didn't even know about what consulting was. I thought I'd go and do research. I get the PhD and go and do research and see how I like that. So for me, I learned about it. I'm like, this is awesome. Like, why did no one tell me about this? And just being able to constantly do new things all the time. Like, I've got a pretty short attention span, so I love being able to just like go and work for a company for a few months, and then it's, you know, see you later. I've got to go and work for another company for a few months, and never actually having to switch jobs. It's fantastic, for me anyway. Yes.
So aside from consulting, are there other industries in business that science graduates typically end up in?
Typically, I'm not sure. I mean, banking is an obvious one for mathematics. So I was looking at actuarial studies and all that sort of stuff after science because it pays a lot, and I was thinking about it at the time. Banking definitely is one. Supply chain and sort of logistics-based fields in companies, they're always looking for engineers, mainly around developing process. So a lot of the value that scientists bring to other parts of business is establishing process and establishing some structure. So organisational dynamics and things like that are always best viewed, I think, through scientific eyes, just because, I mean, there is management science, which is a lot about measuring, but not so much prescriptive. But there's a lot of value you can add by just going in and helping to define a structure for business, especially ones that are very complex, like freight businesses, for example, or products businesses, where they need to understand what the data is telling them about their product ranges, how successful they're being, and when they should actually launch new, you know, marketing campaigns, for example. So yeah, it's one of those things where I think the most important thing is to find something that you actually enjoy a bit, like an industry even. So if you like consumer products, you know, you like gadgets, maybe go and work in a company like that, but do something that, you know, you think you can apply your skills to, but don't just go do something because you think you can get a job in it. I mean, I would have happily waited a year before I started working, besides jumping into a company that I don't think that would have been long-term a very good choice for me. So I think first, find something that you enjoy doing, I think. Chris?
Hey,
how are you?
You keep saying that you're happy that you're using your science skills to do stuff.
Yeah.
But do you miss the actual science?
Actual science? I mean, I consider myself a scientist in business. Like, it's not so much, I mean, when I was in when I was in science and actually doing research and all that sort of stuff, there was all the us versus them, commerce and technology and the academic purists, but I've found like business is so complex. The complexity of business, I've found that's one of the biggest learnings that I've had. It wasn't anything like I thought it'd be. I went in there thinking I'll just go and do a few things and see if I like it and then jump back out. But the more that I got into it, the more scientific that I found business actually was. And the commerce that fuels technology innovation, I started getting involved in that. And it's just amazing. Like I work now in technology innovation for companies, and what they're pretty much looking at how can they harness new technologies to use in their business. And it's science. I mean, it's pure science. It's working out cause and effect, or certain correlations between things, making decisions, forming hypotheses, using metrics and measurements to actually make something clearer than it is. I mean, for me, the purpose of science is to probe things and understand them better. And business is so complex that science is actually done. It's just not called science. And there are fields, as I said, called management science. And just because I'm not sort of smashing atoms together, it's still, to me, it's still science, at the core. Yeah.
Accenture is kind of known for being technology or science orientated. Do you think that's one of the reasons that you enjoyed it so much? Do you think that your experience would be different and more general?
Yeah, probably. And so I work for Accenture, which is well known for technology consulting and technology implementations. It was a reason why I chose to work at Accenture, because I knew I could do it, really. I knew that I understood the technology well enough that I could bring value straight off the bat. When I look at other, very strictly management consulting firms that aren't anything to do with technology, they just focus on organisational stuff, I probably would have had to do an MBA, I think, to get in there without some very good reason to go in. I think for me, joining a company like Accenture, and there's a few others in that area, it was easier for me to relate to the actual work, because working in physics and the technology that I could then, as I said, I used MATLAB when I first got there and stopped doing that after a while. But it helped me actually transition, because I could understand the technology, and then everything I was doing was sort of working with the technology. And then over time, I just gradually learned more of the business stuff and moved further from technology into the management consulting area. So yeah, it was an advantage, and I'd recommend people who are looking at consulting, management consulting, to look at technology consulting as well, because that is quite a useful way to get into business and be relevant from the bat. Because as scientists, we work a lot with technology, we work a lot with instruments, and business also requires all of that technology to make their businesses run. So it's almost an easy step into the business world, if that's what you're interested in. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Hi, as I understand it, you're involved in a lot of extracurricular things during your time at Monash,
yes.
The club and all that. So through all those experiences at the university, do you believe that those sort of management style things like the running of the club and all those conferences you went to, do you believe that these extracurricular activities actually help prepare you for the world of consulting?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was studying, I think one of the things that I always had in the side of my mind is, what am I going to do with this? I mean, I didn't just want to stay in a classroom, and I didn't just want to stay in front of a computer. So that was the reason I was starting to branch out and do more of these organisational style things. And I think anyone who has the opportunity to do them should do them. I mean, if you like it or not, it's a good way to get outside your comfort zone, because once you do leave university, you are outside your comfort zone, whether you like it or not. And I think transitioning into an environment where I was expected to actually know some of that stuff, it was a real advantage. And I'm not sure how much opportunity people still have to do that, but I think if anyone gets an option to go on the board of even a sports club or something like that, just understanding how organisations work, just very generally, instead of just thinking I'm a cog in the wheel, tell me where to go. You're actually helping to make things happen and bring people together and actually achieve things. I think that's important for anything in not just business, just a career, that you're always focused on working with other people to achieve something instead of just doing what you're told to do and getting paid for it. So yeah, it helped a lot. Yeah.
You talked about a lot of some of your colleagues who sort of have a physics, chemistry, psychology background. Is there many biology sort of background scientists in your firm, or is that...
There are, surely. I don't know of any particular people. I think it's not a disadvantage to be in life sciences and go into management, put it that way, if that's the crux of the question. I think anything that's a core science foundation is going to be valuable. And what I found is that, yes, the mathematics was useful from an analytics point of view, but mostly just understanding what's fact versus fiction. I mean, a clear distinction like that, going into an organisation where they've got a lot of people just talking and making noise and not really getting anything out of it, and you're coming in and you're like, well, why are you doing that when that results in this? Having something as simple as that as you're going in position is quite powerful. And all of the things you've learned about biology and that you obviously enjoyed about it, yes, that's something you'll always have, but also with that comes this scientific foundation that everyone shares who goes through this course or something similar. So there are people I know, senior people who have done that kind of stuff. We have profiles of people who are senior executives and they say, I've got a science degree in biology or whatever. So not that I've actually asked them about it, but yeah, they exist for sure. Anyone else?
What about psychology?
Yeah, definitely.
Like, I haven't done any psychology. Like, would it be unhelpful?
Well, psychology is useful for getting along in life, I guess. It's always useful. It just depends on how much you actually want to learn and to apply it. I mean, obviously you have a lot of people who understand psychology to the nth degree but never apply it, and is it worth knowing it in that case? So I think it's one of those things you just learn as much as you think you need to apply. Even if it's reading a good book on leadership or on management or on something like that, don't be afraid that because you haven't been formally schooled in it. I mean, for me, I did it for 2 years because I loved doing it. I just thought it was cool. And it just happens that I can reapply some of the things that I learned. But if I didn't do it, I mean, there's a lot of things that I didn't study and now I know a lot about just because I read about them, in my own time. So I think don't be afraid that you don't have formal background, because you'll realise more and more, I think, that formal background starts to make you think in a very categorical way that this is all to know about psychology, for example. But then you can go and read a book which spans a whole lot of disciplines and you've actually got more of a useful understanding, in my opinion. Not saying that the psychology degree is no good, I'm just saying that it's good to be able to hear or read things from people who are actually applying it, instead of worrying that, do I have the credentials?
Cool. Before you mentioned travel is a major factor in what you do. You said you've travelled to workplaces all over Australia. When you were a science graduate and looking into getting into a career just right when you were graduating, did that occur to you from the start that you wanted to pick a job that travelled a lot? And was that a major determining factor in why you chose to be a consultant?
Yeah, I think I was always thinking it would be nice to travel. Whether I travelled or not wasn't really a huge factor in it, but it was one of those things that it comes with the job. So the job has so much flexibility just built into it that it was sort of like, do I like travelling all the time? Probably not, but am I willing to get the experience? Yes. So it's fun for a while, and then you sort of get over it. And for me, it's sort of come in waves. I have to travel interstate for a couple of months and stay in a hotel, and it's sort of novel from the start. But then you really have to adopt this kind of thing as a lifestyle. It's not just going to work and getting paid. It's really your new life. And if travelling a lot is part of it, you sort of have to accept it and make the most of it. It's like if you can do it, like if you can put up with it, I think it's worth doing. But if you have family and all that sort of stuff, then it makes it tough.
Did you travel a lot prior to?
No, not really. I mean, to Sydney with Monash, but that was all. And then, before I know it, there was this company flying me over to the USA to do training with all of these guys from Europe and the US, and it was sort of like, it sort of just opened my eyes to how big this thing was. I mean, we're all at university and we understand what's happening around the world, but when it's sort of in your face and you're dealing with someone from Germany who's doing the same thing you're doing but over there, and you're discussing ideas and all that sort of thing, it's sort of mind-blowing. It's especially in a multinational company where everyone is sort of doing the same stuff all over the world, and then you meet each other and it's like, very similar people I've found to me, just growing up in other areas of the world that I've now got contact with. So I'm glad, that I'm travelling quite a bit now. And that's where I think if you're looking at consulting, it's sort of worth doing it early. If you've still got the energy and the flexibility to be able to do it. I think if you try and go and do something else and then come back to it maybe in 10 years, it might be a bit tough to pick up and deal with all of the flexibility that it requires. I think it's a great way to actually build up a whole lot of diverse skills and see whether you actually like doing consulting for one, and if there's something that you particularly enjoy as part of it, then you can also specialise in that and move out of the industry and work for one of the clients perhaps. But you sort of get a taste of everything. Yeah.
On that travel topic, it sounds like you didn't really have much of a choice about traveling.
Correct.
Are there those choices, and like, do you get to decide what you're going to work on? Or
Sort
do
of.
you get told most of the time, go here, work on this, go to the USA, work on that?
Yeah. So there's bits and pieces, because it's one of those things. Promotions is one thing. So if you're willing to travel and if you're willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that we're in business and making money and making the clients happy, then you're probably going to get promoted quicker. So it's always a meritocracy, and if you don't want to travel, you know, you can't be forced to get on an aeroplane. But I think it's sort of why you're in the business then. If you just wanted to have a particular job in a particular city and just go to work every day and do the same thing, that's not really the essence of what consulting is. It is very much, where is the problem? We go to it, we fix it, and then we come back, and it's sort of...
choice of the problem. You know, if there's a problem in Sydney and a problem in Brisbane or something, you get to...
Again, it comes back to the meritocracy. So whoever has done the Brisbane one in the past might get to go to Sydney this time. So it's like, it's not a computer spitting out decisions on where you go. It's real people talking, and obviously it's not about making it painful for people, because no one really likes to be travelling outside of their city. But you know, if I hadn't travelled, then I wouldn't have got the experiences that I had. You know, if you have to go somewhere to the corporate head office and talk to the people who are running the company, you know, you're not going to just call them on the telephone and just say it's nice back in Melbourne. It's sort of like, there is a lot of value in actually doing it. So yeah, in some cases you don't have much of a choice, but then as you progress in your career, then you also start to realise, what are the things that I want to do? If I actually do want to relocate somewhere, or if I only want to do something that I've already established for myself in Melbourne, then that's both possible, but you can't actually get there from a point of saying, I'm never going to travel, I'll just wait for things to come to me. You know, it's one of those things that you really have to get out there and find what you want to do and what you're good at. Yes, Chris?
What about the recruitment process?
Yeah.
Do you make it sound like you were either lucky or it was very easy? You just gave somebody a call and they said, yeah, come on down.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
It's a bit more cutthroat.
It wasn't that lucky. Yeah, but you're right. The graduate program is probably the best way for graduates to get in, just because you go through a staged interview process. Unfortunately, I think for next year that it's already finished. I think it finishes in May, June, most years. Usually the way that consulting hires people is through more situational interview processes. So it's sort of like you'll go in there, and instead of looking down a list of your resume items, they'll more be interested in your personality and why you're doing it, you know, what you're hoping to achieve out of it personally, what your long-term goals are. So it's worth thinking about this kind of stuff when you're actually choosing, do I want to do consulting as a career or not? And then you'll probably be asked things like, you know, what was a time when you resolved conflict, and can you give us an example and walk through it and tell us how you did it, as opposed to just, you know, handing them your resume and sitting there while they evaluate it. It's a very much of a dialogue between people who you'll be working with, and they're seeing if you'll actually fit the culture. Because I think in big corporations now, the corporate culture is so important, and it's important to do background on all of the companies that you're looking at to see, am I actually in tune with that culture? Do I want to work with this group of people? Because it could easily backfire the other way if you think that there's a great job there, but the people aren't the kind of people you want to be working with. That's probably not going to work either. So you sort of progress through these different stages of interviews. You may get told to do a case study, so they'll sit you down and say, here's a problem. Show us how you would actually work through that. And there's sort of examples like how many cars in New York City or something like that. And you have to pretty much break down the problem, and there's no right or wrong answer. They just watch how you analyse problems and how you come up with, you know, assumptions and solve the problem, because that's what they're interested in. They're interested in how your mind deals with complexity and deals with problems. not so much about the right or the wrong answer. So yeah, it's more of a cultural thing, and it's more testing to see whether you'll be good to put in front of a client as well. So it's always best to just make a fantastic impression if you can, not worry too much about getting the resume credentials in. They're usually very interested in extracurricular experience as well, because everyone's got a uni degree that goes in there. So it's not so much of a distinguisher, it's more what you've done while you were doing university, which would make you more of a diverse asset to the company. Yeah, so if you are interested in the grad program, you probably have to wait until next year at this point. Otherwise, if you go onto any of the consulting firm websites, then they usually say how to apply and whether they're doing out of cycle intakes and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Any more? Yeah.
Was there anything that cemented for yourself to stay as a business consultant instead of just looking at other alternatives?
Yeah, I've found, because I always thought that I'd spend a year or two in business and then go back to science. That's what I always thought I'd do. And I think over time it's sort of just, the lifestyle's nice, and when you start meeting people and you become part of a group that's achieving something real, it's hard to step away from it, I've found. So where I'm at, personally, is that I've built a network in this company of clients and people that I trust and people that I like working with. And for me to drop that is quite a painful thing. I mean, when I left Monash, I had a lot of things happening, and it was quite hard to let that go and go into something else. And I think if I was to give advice, I'd say commit to something for like 5 years and make sure that you get good at something before you do something else. Because if you just go in there and you do this, a bit of this, 2 years of that, 2 years of that, you sort of, I think from the people that I've spoken to, that I work with who have done that, they're not really happy about, going and doing things as they actually feel that they, get sick of this thing, so they go and do something else. For me as well, I've sort of been thinking there are good days and there are bad days, but there's more good days, and so it's sort of like I'll stick with it until I really know that there's something different for me to do. And that being said, there's all the diversity that I actually want in a career in one place, which is why I said for scientists it's actually quite a good option. So if you're not interested in just going into business, taking a big risk and doing just one thing, going into actuarial stuff and just doing modelling all day, you actually have the choice to go and speak with clients and to work out what's happening in their marketing department, what's happening in their development for products and all this sort of stuff. And seeing all these different companies and all these different industries, even working with the government on different things, it's a totally different job than what I was doing like 2 months ago, but it's the same company, same role, sometimes the same people. So for me, if I wanted to change, I'd just go and work in a different client at this point. Yeah. So look, it's quite good, I've found. Any more? Yeah. Hi.
If you could set your university years up again to suit the skills that you need now, what year would you be choosing as a best second year university?
Look, mathematics, I think, the language of science is always useful. To answer your question directly, I wouldn't have changed anything. If I knew what I needed to know going in, then I wouldn't have changed anything. I just read the business books earlier, to be honest. I mean, because I loved doing what I was doing when I was at university, that helped me hone my skill set into something that was valuable for me. And I wouldn't have chose consulting if I wasn't interested in doing what I had previously done. So if I was thinking of what's the career and trying to angle towards that and get to it, I'd sort of invested too much energy trying to get to the career instead of enjoying what I was doing at the time, because I didn't know that I'd go into it. And if I could recommend choosing curricula, I think just choose what you actually enjoy doing. I mean, from a science degree, you're going to get the core skills anyway, so you'll get them by virtue of the degree structure. Everything else you do outside of that, if you're not enjoying it, then you're probably not going to enjoy a career in it either, you know what I mean? But I think everyone should learn mathematics. I love it. I think it just helps so much, not just in business, it's just going to open up the world of employment, really. So if you can learn as much mathematics as you can, I think, but not so much that you get tired of it. Yeah. Yeah.
When you say mathematics, you're talking about like mathematics and sort of calculus, or are you talking about statistics?
A lot of the work that I have used math for is mostly linear algebra and statistics. But that being said, if I have some kind of change business case or something where I have to deal with change, and I use differential equations to at least frame the problem. That's something that, if I didn't know about it, I'd have solved it a different way. But just knowing about different branches of mathematics just helps you understand problems, and especially ones that are changing over time and all that sort of thing. Calculus, I don't know, I probably have used it, but then differential equations are just calculus, aren't they? I mean, it's sort of, you'll never know when you'll need the skills, I think. You're never going to walk into a project and they say, solve this equation. They might say, here is a business situation, and if you look at all of the different variables that are happening, you can actually form some kind of mathematical construct and say to them, if you do this here, then this is what happens here. And there's a power relationship or a squared relationship. And so if you keep doing this, this will keep happening. So it's very, very basic mathematics, really. So algebra, I think, is one of the most powerful things you can use in business, just to help solve things and make things clear, especially just certain variables to one another. Yeah, wouldn't be too worried about a whole branch of mathematics. As long as you have the foundations, I think that's good. Yes.
Just building on that point, what do you suggest that people aren't very much or involved?
Probably focus on the organisational side of things. It's not that mathematics is a prerequisite for business. I think it helps, and look, maybe that's just my biased perspective because I'm doing a lot of analytical stuff, therefore I need mathematics for it. There's also a lot of people in business who deal with organisational change, talent and performance and all of that sort of area that isn't quantifiable, but is very important because it's how the system operates essentially. And then you have someone else who does the mathematics. And that's the beauty of having diversity of teams, especially people from science and different science areas. And working with engineers who have a very design-oriented view of a situation or a project, and they can pretty much tell me what I'd be missing if I took a purely analytic point of view. And same with people who have done psychology or have done politics or something like that. They bring their perspective, which, if they weren't in the team, then you wouldn't have had that point of view. So I don't think it's a bad thing not to have a strong mathematics background. I think it helps in a lot of situations, but it's not essential for being successful. Yeah. Yeah, one last question. Sorry, I'm almost there. Go on. Yeah.
So obviously each business that you work with for each project might be rather different. But how different is the goals which they're in effect employing you to?
Extremely different. Yeah, so there's a lot of, if I was going into a new client, I'd have to read a lot about their company background. If I hadn't worked for them before, I'd have to at least learn about their industry, understand what their different competitors are doing in the industry, what are the regulations and things that are happening, sort of what's the context around what their situation is before anything. And then it's always different. You've got different people you're working with, so their directors essentially have their own perspective on how their business should be run if it's a business. So you're dealing a lot with just working out what people want to do with their own business, working out whether that is actually going to be achievable doing a certain course of action. Depends on what they want. I mean, we could be in there just to give advice for a few weeks. They'd say, we're thinking of doing this big plan. Do you think it's worth doing, or do you think it's worth doing something else? And if so, can you help us plan that out? Or they might want us to go in there and make sure that the program they've just run just keeps on embedding itself in the organisation. It's infinite, the possibilities. There are, the way that our business is structured is that we look at certain types of, skill requirements. So if they want a specific thing done in their company, they know that we can do that specific thing. But then any other situation, they might also come and say, how would you approach this type of problem? And we can say, well, we have a certain offering for how we'd approach something similar. We can change it a little bit, or we can just come in and start from scratch. And that comes back to the scientific method and looking at what is the challenge and how is it built as a system and how can you actually change that system to get what they want. So in answer to your question, anything and everything. I mean, there's obviously financial limits. We wouldn't do something below a certain value, for example, or above a certain value in some cases. But it's very, very, very large range of what we actually offer as services. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. On behalf of Monash University and the Monash Science faculty, I'd like to thank Leon for coming out and talking to us. Hope you guys got a lot out of it. I know I did. So thanks for coming out.